Hello, my name is Fred Williams. I do believe that I've been called to be a minister. I was prophesied over several times in the past, over the course of many years, that I would be ministering to people, but I've never had a desire to do so. But I recall some years ago that a prophet, a very dear friend of mine, my wife's spiritual mother, said to me that God would have me to make sermons for the shut-in. And I received her, but I did not act upon it. And so just recently, a couple of months ago, not even that long, a month ago, I had been working out at a fitness center, and I had been praying. I always pray when I work out. I could talk to God clearly then, and I just needed some guidance, some reassurance, some direction. Order my steps, no matter whether they go up or down. Just order them and let me know that you have ordered my steps. And when I departed from the fitness center, I received a call, and I was delighted when I looked at the caller ID, and it was the spiritual woman that I speak of, the prophet. And she said to me that she had been praying with some other people the day before, and my face was shown to her, and God told her to call me and uplift me, and I needed it. And I was delighted to hear that, though I was in tears, I really was, because I just could not believe that God would respond to my request, though. And I was happy. I really thanked her for being so obedient to God. And so I began to realize that what she had prophesied over me was true. And so I started praying, oh God, just show me how to do this. I'm not a preacher. I am not charismatic or anything. And God said to me that you don't have to be. My Holy Spirit will do it. And so many years ago, when I was a deacon at a church, God would give me topics to write devotions about. And the congregants used to say that there were many sermons, and I'm delighted in it. It wasn't my intention. I just loved God so much that I just had a zeal for it. And one of the topics that was very dear to me is, who are you before God, and are you the same way before His people? And that really touches me, because I've seen a lot of things in church. I've seen people come in with stolen gifts. That's what I call them, trying to emulate other people and things like that. I call them stolen gifts. I've seen people one way in church, see them in the dollar store or grocery store, and they're cursing somebody out because they got in line ahead of them or something like that, or the tailors are taking too long to wait on them. And so this fit pretty good with my mindset, who are you before God, and are you the same way before His people? And I chose some passage from the scriptures, from the narratives, from 2 Kings 5, 1 and 2. And I'm going to read that now. It says that now Naaman, commander of the army of the king of Syria, was a great and honorable man in the eyes of his master, who was the Syrian king, because by him the Lord Jehovah, had given victory to Syria through him. He was also a mighty man of valor, but he had a big problem. He was a leper. And the Syrians had gone out on raids and had brought back captive a young girl from the land of Israel. And she waited or served Naaman's wife. Now here we have a Syrian commander, captain of the hosts, a mighty man of valor, that is before men. But he was a leper before God. And we're probably familiar with many accounts of how God delivered the enemies of Israel into the hands of the Israelites. Stories of mighty men of valor such as Joshua, King David, and many others. But not this text. This text reveals an intimate problem of a non-Israelite. In fact, he was a captain of the host of Syria. And God gave him victory over the Israelites. And then in the passage we see that God rips off the veil of this mighty man of valor to reveal his dark secret. He was a leper. The secret that would diminish his status as a mighty man of valor. And if it were revealed to men, they would ostracize him. They would have separated him. They would have stripped him of all his armor and his title and stuff. And as a matter of fact, I believe they put them on an island and they were not allowed to be seen in public if you had leprosy. And so he hid this. And you can only imagine when he would go home, though, the only two people that would see this leprosy was the little old maid from Israel and his wife. And he stood mighty before men with shiny armor with custom-made headgear to distinguish him from the other soldiers. But who was he before God? The religious and political background of this text reminds us that it was after 19 consecutive evil kings in Israel and after the death of Ahab, who was the king of Israel, who did evil in the eyes of God. Sadly to say, we see the gradual decay of the divided kingdom, and the historical background unfortunately describes the miserable end of the divided kingdom, both Israel and Judah. Because the narrative is filled with religious apostasy, I believe that it is safe to conclude that there have been many years of disobedience to God's law. Disobedience which included idolatry, immorality, and disunity. This disobedience would unfortunately kindle, spark, prompt God in a divine judgment. Lack of divine discipline led to two nations on a collision course with captivity. Later in 2 Kings, Israel is taken into captivity by Assyria and Judah to Babylon. A broken covenant with God would prove to be somewhat cataclysmic for the twin nations. Did you know that God will sometime use your enemy to punish you? Now, I want to just remind us about this covenant that they had broken, the idolatry and the sexual immorality and stuff. And if you look at Deuteronomy 28, God says, "And it shall come to pass, if thou shalt hearken diligently unto the voice of the Lord thy God, to observe and to do all his commandments, which I command thee this day, that the Lord thy God will set thee on high above all nations of the earth." And from 1 through 14, he tells them how he will bless them, all the earth, though, the treasures. I mean, he would just bless them if they would hearken to his voice. Their cities, their crops would be blessed. And then he goes on in 15 to say, "But it shall come to pass, if thou wilt not hearken unto the voice of the Lord thy God, to observe to do all his commandments and his statutes, which I command thee this day, that all these curses shall come upon thee and overtake thee." And boy, are there some curses. He talks in there about taking them into captivity and about being disease infested, and their crops were destroyed and things. And we see this in 2 Kings chapter 5. And so here we have a mighty man of valor, mighty before men, but a leper before God. And so one day the slave woman, the woman, the Israelite, the maid woman, the maid woman was talking to his wife, to Naaman's wife, and she told her that, "I know a prophet in Samaria that could heal your husband." Now, isn't it ironic that here we had this man who went and decimated the Israelites, and thank God that he didn't kill everybody, because the answer to his healing lie in the very woman that he had taken captive. You know, sometimes God will put you in a place that you don't want to be. You can only imagine that this young woman did not want to be there. And let me remind you, though, in those days, they did not take 21 years old, 37-year-old. They took 13 and 14-year-old little girls to be made. She didn't want to be there. And she didn't have to tell him about this prophet. And many of you right today withhold blessings from other people. And isn't their blessing just as important as your blessing? See, sometimes God will put us in the camp of the enemy because he's bringing about a change. It reminds me of something Jesus said when he said, so as Moses has lifted up the serpent, so shall the Son of Man be lifted up. And he said, when he be lifted up from the earth, not the lifting up that some of you guys have talked about. I remember people wanted to argue with me about what he meant by lifting it up. They said, well, he's talking about us worshiping him and praising him. And I thought not. I said, no, he couldn't be saying that, though, because that means he won't be lifted up. You know, because we sometimes feel like praising him and sometimes we don't. He's talking about when he finished the work of the Father, though, to redeem us, when he be lifted up, that he could speak from eternity. When he be lifted up, he will draw all men to him. And so here we see him working a non-believer to show himself. And he's got a woman that don't want to be there. See, God's plan will land you somewhere that you don't want to be. You don't want to be there. But if you trust God, though, that's why he said, wait on the Lord and trust thy God. That it's all in his plan, though. And if God did it, if he allowed it to happen, he's going to work it out. And so this young lady tells her, the wife of the commander, that she knows a prophet in Israel that could heal him. And Naaman received the information from his wife, and he goes and tells his king that there's a prophet in Israel where I just left from, where I just killed all those people at. And I got this maid woman, from my wife. And she tells me about this prophet, and it's just ironic. And the king of Syria tells him to go now, and he would prepare a letter to take to the king of Israel. Isn't that amazing? Isn't that amazing? An enemy asking you for a favor. And so he gathers up all of the, everything that he thought that he needed, some talents of silver and some changes of clothes and stuff. And he took that letter to the king of Israel. And it infuriated the king. He rent and tore, he tore his clothes off. He went berserk. He couldn't handle it. And so when he took the letter to the king of Israel, the king got really angry and he tore his clothes. And he said that, am I God or something? Do I kill and make alive? Do I give life and take life? This man want to just pick some stuff with me, Why don't he just leave bygones, just leave it alone? Or, you've already decimated my country and stuff, and then now you want to ask me to do a favor? And so the prophet Elisha heard about it. He went to the king and he heard that he had tore his clothes off, and he told the king that, I'll take care of this. And so the prophet sent word to the old commander to come to his house. And so when Naaman went to the prophet's house, the prophet wouldn't even come to the door. He sent a messenger to tell Naaman, the commander, the mighty man of valor, this mighty man before men who never had to wait to have a meeting with somebody or put in an appointment except, with the king. But other people would bow to him. But now he comes to the door of the prophet, and the prophet won't even see him. He's not even worthy enough to be seen. He's furious, though. You got to be kidding me. Don't you know? Don't he know who I am? He sent this messenger. And the messenger tells him that the prophet said to go to the Jordan River and wash in there 7 times, and his flesh shall be restored to him. And he thought this was ludicrous. You gotta be kidding. I'd come all the way here. You can imagine what Satan was saying to him. You fool, you. I told you not to come. They degraded you. You know, you're not a mighty man in valor anymore. And so he really was upset about it, and he just couldn't. He couldn't handle this. This was too much for him. And then his servant said to him that if the prophet had asked you for something great, wouldn't you have done it? And all he asked you to do is to go and wash and be clean. And you could only imagine, he thought about it and said, this is ridiculous. You got to go down to this nasty Jordan River with blood all in it and germs and disease and wash in this water, And so he went. And when he went, he dipped in several times, but when he came up, he was still a leper. And he got furious, you could only imagine. Even on the 6th time, he's got to be kidding me 7 times. If it's going to happen, it should have happened before, And he was about to quit, and he decided to dip again. When he came up that 7th time, he was healed. And he really couldn't believe it. And he went back to the prophet. And this time he saw the prophet, and he tried to offer him something. He wanted to give him something, and the prophet refused it. And so Naaman decided to make the offerings to the Lord Jehovah. He said, surely there's no God in all the earth except in Israel. Now, therefore, he will worship the Lord Jehovah. Now, this passage is, I believe, have some universal truth to it, because just as the Israelites were disobedient to God, we see that right today, a country that God made mighty, but we see that it is plagued with sexual immorality and disunity. And here we are being held hostage in this country by terrorists, and we got school shootings and things, and God is trying to tell us something. God is trying to tell us something. I believe that 2 Chronicles 7:14 is relevant now. I truly believe, and it says that if my people who are called by my name would humble themselves and pray and seek, crave me, use me, desire me as a necessity, seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear them, or hear from heaven, and forgive them of their sins and heal their land. I'll heal their bodies. It's part of your land. People are talking about cancer and things like cancer is bigger than God. And God actually gave us dominion over cancer. And so we're deteriorating now. We're vanishing because of our disobedience, our broken covenant. And I believe that if we would come back to God, though, that he would hear us and heal us. And so I say to you today, though, good old Christians and non-Christians, though, that this God loves us so much that he gave his only begotten Son, that we may have life and have life abundantly. And so I would say that humble yourself before God. God said if you would humble yourself before thee, that I would exalt thee. But if you exalt thee, I will humble you. And I believe that's what God has done. Write your comments. I'll improve as I go along. And I thank you for listening. And I pray that the Father allow us to have clear understanding. I hope that there's some relevance in this message here. I pray that we see the face of God and humble ourselves and turn from our wicked ways.